Psychoanalysis, separation never happens. Namaste. Relating and separating are two primary aspects of human psychic life. Among one of the central ideas in psychoanalysis is the idea of loss, often also called object loss. How do we process it? Can we be free from its after effects? Exploring this time today with psychoanalysis consultant Dr. Himanshu Ved. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, to paint a background, why is relating and separating of such central concern?
We can proceed on this question in two different ways. One way is the psychoanalytic way, and the second one is the general way. In a general sense, we as a species essentially are a herd species. And we are hardwired to attach. And we attach in a unique way that we solicit attachment also from the other. And this is one of the primary mechanisms by which infants attach to parents and parents attach to infants. This is at the root of survival of our species. The attachment of the infant to the parent and the parent to the infant. And this attachment then multiplies in terms of the social herd, that we live in groups, we work in groups, we hunt in groups. And this also brings into focus the central idea of attaching. So there is attachment between two individuals. There is attachment between individual and a group. There is attachment between two groups. And there is also an intrapsychic attachment of an individual to objects, maybe even an ideology. So we see that in general, as a species, we are a very attaching species. In fact, attachment happens unconditionally. If you live in a hostel room for 5 years, when you are about to vacate that room, your eyes go moist, they water up. When you were living in that room, you were cursing that room, every day talking about when you will get out of that room. So even what you dislike, you can get attached to. And the same is true for everything, that we are unconditionally attaching individuals, species. So we get attached to everything, to the building, to places, to human beings, even to non-human beings like pets or animals, or to nature. So we see attachment in three different ways: human attachments, non-human living attachments, as well as completely inanimate attachments. We also see attachments to psychological objects inside our mind, which may be completely fantasy objects. So we see that we are essentially a attachment, unconditionally attaching species. And with attachment, there comes a very important aspect of the break of attachment, which we call as separation. So attachment and separation are central to the way human mind functions. And this is something dictated by nature. This is not something which 5 human beings got together, thought over, and decided, okay, from next Monday, 4 o'clock, we will become attaching organisms. It didn't work that way. It's hardwired into us. It's beyond us. So attachment and separation, in a way, are ordained by nature, by forces which are beyond our awareness and control. And these are central to human existence. So this is where the attachment and the separation comes in. Now, we also see the two ends of the spectrum. That on one hand, we are unconditionally attaching human beings. And because we are unconditionally attaching human beings and our affect is thrown everywhere. There is a discussion we had done before, I thrown everywhere. That part of us are thrown everywhere, and we see ourselves in a way fragmented and thrown at an unconscious level, attaching fragments of us to different objects. And our attachment is thrown around. Our awareness, our concern is thrown around. We don't realize this consciously. But at a deeper unconscious level, our attachment, our awareness, our concentration, our affect is fragmented and thrown around, which I call I thrown everywhere. So this is one end of the spectrum. On the other hand, just as we are unconditionally attaching species, there is also the problem of inadequate attachment, which we see in pathology. So whether we talk of midlife crisis, or we talk of anxious personality disorder, or schizoidal personality disorder, or narcissistic personality disorder, we see what we are hardwired to, we develop a problem in that precise area and we become attachment avoidant in different ways. Because we are so deeply disappointed with attachments and we realize attachments are so painful. And this in turn gives rise to intense loneliness and a range of emotions which somatize and produce psychosomatic sicknesses. Many of the sicknesses, both psychological and biological, which emerge after midlife crisis or after retirement, the geriatric issues, many of them have to do with inadequate attachments, which is against the very grain of our design. Now, conceptually, so this is the practice part of it, that we see human beings attaching everywhere, human beings finding it difficult to separate, human beings occasionally celebrating the separation and getting disappointed at attachments and developing loneliness and then suffering from symptoms because of inadequate attachments. Now, conceptually, there are 2 points here in psychoanalysis. One, the object relation schools believes that the human mind right from birth is a object relating machine, that we cannot have a blank mind. We are constantly relating to objects. If objects are not found outside us, we create objects in fantasy inside us. But objects are constantly created and related to. Another way of looking at it is to say, our thought and our feelings cannot be completely deactivated. At some level, they are always active from birth till death. And both our thoughts and our feelings, they need an object on which to attach themselves. Because we don't experience anything like pure thought or pure affect. We always have a thought towards something. We always have an affect towards something. So, object relation schools believes that we are constantly object relating organisms, and that in a way constantly leads to an object attaching situation. Freud has a slightly different view where he talks about primary narcissism, a state without object relations. It's a state before object relations. So the object relations school does not believe any such state is possible, but Freud definitely believes this state to be there. And what I have come to experience and also read and believe, partly from my own experience and partly from Hindu spirituality, is this, that on the lines of what Freud said, such states are possible. It is possible to have a state where you can experience pure affect. It is possible to have a state where you can experience a state of no thought. It is possible to have an experience of an oceanic oneness with existence. But these are rare experiences.
Freud, what you're saying, Freud had an explanation in a very pathological way by
Correct.
what you sound like it's more of a much detached and processed and aware person in the spiritual growth section.
Correct, correct. Because for Freud, the primary narcissism was a developmental stage to be passed over. It was not a goal state. And in adult life, it was to reappear. It was seen more or less pathological. But in spirituality, this is a goal state. Because for Freud, this was a pre-ego state which should never come up once the ego stage and the I and not I are established. But Indian spiritual, especially Hindu spirituality, says that first you establish the I and then you surpass the I. So first you experience ego, you experience I and not I, and then you experience the oceanic state by going beyond the state of I and not I. Okay. Now, in the Western psychoanalytic terms, this is not even possible. So it's neither possible nor a goal state. For Hindu spirituality, it is both possible and also a goal state. So what we see here is rare experiences, because these are not everybody's everyday experiences. Everybody's everyday experiences are object relations experiences. So this is where we can start off as a background that attachment and separation are inseparable and constant and ceaseless parts of human existence. Now, this brings us to the point of separation. And just to lay the background before we go into the depth of it, separation you can think of in three different ways: happy separation, normal separation, and pathological separation. Happy separation is where you thank God that the separation has happened.
Okay, I thought it's probably the state where separation is taken in a very happy spirit and healthy way.
Yeah, so that's a fourth one. But the first is the happy separation, where the object is so troublesome that you pray to God for an object separation. And you are very happy the separation happens. And you are ecstatic the moment separation happens, because the attachment in a way was deeply disturbing in many ways. The second is the normal separation, where you feel the pain of separation, you feel the anxiety of separation, and you undergo the mourning process. And after some time, you emerge out of it and you move on to other attachments. Substitutes are found, other attachments are found. And the third is the pathological separation, which is what we will be focusing upon. And this, as it stands, is 75% of all separation instances. Right? That very few people separate happily. Similarly, a minority separates in a normal way, where mourning is complete. In most cases, the mourning is never complete, and the separation is never smooth. Right? It leaves behind its own sadness, its own melancholy. And therefore, 75% separations are pathological separations, because they leave behind a sadness where you separate and you don't want to separate. Or you are split between separating and not separating. So this is how the background is. And just to conclude the first answer, there are two things very important for our psychological health, and the two are related. First is maintaining a healthy attachment portfolio, that you are healthily attached to 5 to 7 people at the least in your life in different ways. Not that all the 7 are lovers or all the 7 are parent figures or teacher figures, but a heterogeneous mix of relationships in color and flavor. So a healthy attachment portfolio and our efficiency to separate. Because if the separation process is not efficient, it will be difficult to maintain a healthy attachment portfolio, because then we won't find substitutes and we'll be afraid of attaching to anybody anew. So the two are related. The separation efficiency is very much related to maintaining the healthy attachment portfolio by finding substitutes of people who leave or whom we leave. But this is central to the psychological health, the maintaining a healthy attachment portfolio and a healthy separation efficiency. In performance terms, these two are central to our psychological health.
So, owing to law of land, where death is the biggest separation in the physical sense, also adding on to all the formats thought that of an object loss. That sounds very philosophical. So, what has been the traditional view of psychoanalysis on separation, specifically?
Traditionally, psychoanalysis has said that in most cases, separation never happens. In the sense, it does not happen fully. And Freud was very categorical about it, because Freud believed that there is no way we can process our losses fully. And this goes, of course, for a majority of losses. And what happens is, because complete mourning is not possible, given the amount of sadness and our resistance to feel that sadness, what happens is the loss is managed by a sophisticated denial. And the sophisticated denial is this: our ego undergoes a modification and makes a part of the person who has left us a part of oneself. So some part of the person who has left us is taken in and made our own. So it's a sophisticated way of denying the loss, because the person is now with us. So he has not left us. And forever he shall be with us. He shall never leave us, because we have made him a part of ourselves. So some of his habits, some of his likes and dislikes, something of him we take in our own way. Maybe some action that he used to do, we start performing, or certain words he used to use, we start using. Certain things we do which prove that he is still around in a psychological sense, because those things are happening which he used to do. And our ego the ego takes in that person, identifies with the person, and then it makes itself a part of oneself. And in that process of making it a part of oneself, the ego undergoes a modification itself. And Freud used to say that a substantial part of any person's personality can be made out by analyzing the losses he has suffered. Because every time a loss happens, the ego undergoes a modification. So a substantial part of the personality is the sum total of modifications you have undergone in all the losses that you have experienced. So part of the personality always is the cumulative net outcome of the losses we have suffered. And there is no way to completely bypass or overcome this situation. That a substantial part of an adult's personality, especially those who are post 35, who have had the length of the time to experience multiple losses, or who have been too unfortunate to experience it too early, a substantial part of their personality has undergone a modification to accommodate a series of object losses. And therefore, a core of depression, a core of melancholy is present in every individual. because there is no individual who has undergone perfect mourning of all the losses. And in a way, our character is sort of a gallery, a museum that exhibits all the losses we have undergone if one has eyes to see it. So there is the outer character in a way is a gallery of the inner world and the losses experienced by the inner world. And this we can see how difficult separation is in case of repeatedly we see this in psychoanalysis. That a person comes at 35, 45, 55 and is still not able to process any separation or attachment which he experienced traumatically so many years back, and he still recollects those days. We see people after 45 going back to their schools, to their colleges, to their villages from where they have come, and trying to achieve an emotional closure, because it has been an open wound in the unconscious for so many years. And the wound will close only if you repeatedly undergo an experience, and often a real experience, not just a recollective experience. So we see this in psychological sickness, in psychoanalysis every day. We see that in personality disorder. We see it in psychosomatic sickness. We see it in hundreds of defensive actions which result in symptoms, where either a lost attachment or a fear of attachment being lost is at the center of pathological thought and behavior. So we see it every day that in psychoanalysis, ideal separation where 100% mourning happens is an ideal which we strive towards, which inspires us, but mostly is never achieved. And therefore, and this we see even in ISTDP, that you put on the chair the healthiest of person and put pressure to feel the feelings, and so much of sadness of separation comes up, of object losses comes up, and you can video record it and see it as evidence, as scientific as it can get. And it proves what traditionally Freud and psychoanalysis has always said, that a complete separation, a perfect separation is a ideal. It's almost a mirage for most of us. And a separation is never complete. We always hold some part of the incomplete separation inside of us. And that core of melancholy, that ego modification, is always an inseparable part of us.
So when we talk about the reasons for separation and how psyche operates in the beginning, can we go into the symptom formation out of inability to separate?
Take, for example, personality disorders. In the personality disorders, take the dependent with highest difficulty of separation. Take schizoid and narcissistic, who are dealing with it in a convoluted way, that the fear of abandonment, the fear of object loss is avoided or managed dysfunctionally by avoiding attachments per se, real attachments. So the terror of separation is found in direct or indirect ways across most of the personality disorders. And look at the borderline. And the most blatant is, I will leave you before you leave me. Or using aggression and hatred and de-idealization as tools to separate, because otherwise separation is not possible. So to separate, we have to find the fault with the object. We have to evoke hatred and aggression. So unless hatred, aggression, and de-idealization come into picture, right, or damage of self-interest comes into picture, in most cases of real attachment, separation is very difficult. And in certain cases of personality disorders, even in abusive relationships, the separation is difficult. Where you see this separation difficulty in the most florid way. That even if the object is bad, there is a terror of vacuum and there is a terror of the pain of separation. So there are two hierarchies people operate by in the area of attachment. The first hierarchy is good attachment, no attachment, bad attachment. So this group will say the first choice is good attachment. If I can't get a good attachment, I don't want any attachment, and bad attachment is number 3. But there is another group of people who will have the hierarchy, which is good attachment, bad attachment, and no attachment. So here they are terrified of the vacuum and the loneliness more than the pain of abuse. So between an abusive relationship and no relationship, they choose an abusive relationship, because the loneliness for them and the pain of separation is more terrifying than the pain of abuse. So they make a choice at a deep level, that on one hand you have the pain of abuse, on the other hand you have the pain of vacuum and the anxiety of vacuum and the pain of separation. And between the two pains, they find the pain of abuse to be more manageable. So they continue an abusive relationship. And masochism also plays a part. And the anger towards oneself, which is usually anger towards the parents deflected back on oneself, that also plays a part. So one is in an abusive relationship, partly out of the terror of vacuum, partly out of the pain of separation, terror of the pain of separation, partly out of masochism, partly out of taking revenge from the parents, where one self-destroys oneself to take revenge. So all this play out when we talk of abusive relationships, and partly out of familiarity in some cases, who have always experienced abusive cases, abusive relationships, because for them it's a safe familiar ground. And a healthy relationship seems too anxiety provoking, too new, too anxiety provoking, too unfamiliar, and does not have the intensity. So we see in psychosis, in personality disorders, the difficulty of separation playing out in the most florid way. So if you look at PDs, personality disorders, the fear of loss, the fear of attack, and I am not good enough, the presence of split, the high guilt, and reckless identification and reckless projection, these are common to most personality disorders. So, and in many personality disorders, after some separation which was so painful and was never accomplished, the template is never again. That attachment leads to separation. Separation is so painful, difficult to do. So never have an attachment again. And then you are in a fix, because genetically you are hardwired as a species to attach and to connect. And experience tells you don't connect. So then you are caught in that logjam. I want closeness, I don't want closeness. It's a jigsaw logjam and you can't move, you are stuck. You're stuck in that emotional traffic jam, that one part, the genetic deepest parts of you wants attachment, wants closeness, wants object relations. And experience tells you these things bring pain, so don't get into them. And the two enter into a logjam, and you get stuck in the position, I want connection, I don't want connection. So, and that is the situation of most people in the Western world today, where loneliness has become a major problem. Because loneliness at a deep level is a choice. It's a choice which is coming out of deep disappointments and serial deep disappointments. When disappointments are deep and they reoccur again and again, it leads to resignation. And then you say, I'm done with it. No more. And then at a very deep level, you choose loneliness. And at the surface level, you complain of loneliness. So this is the...
That means that in the first place, it is the inability to handle separation, which leads to the further manifestation of difficult issues like depression or addiction. So they're the secondary manifestation of this first state itself.
Yeah. In many cases, the early childhood separation just has not been managed. So we are still fighting with it. In some cases, there is a serial experience of difficult separations, and then it leads to disappointment and resignation. And there's a separate line which both of them can lead to the same thing. And worst situation, both of them independently happen in the same person, right? At different ages, and in the midlife, the both go florid together. So this is the symptomatically speaking. Say, for example, the separation can result in a fetish. Separation difficulty can result in a fetish. Separation difficulty can result in avoidance, pathological avoidance of something, which can appear as a phobia, but is a pathological avoidance of something. The separation difficulty can lead to a personality disorder. It can lead even to, in some cases, with very early, it can lead to psychosis. So in some depression cases where the difficulty is detaching oneself from the internalized dead mother, the separation difficulty is internal and completely unconscious. It's a very difficult thing to get to and heal. I mean, unless you do a real long-term psychoanalysis and very intense, how do you make the person realize that there is a pathological identification and inability to separate at an unconscious level with the internalized dead mother? Now, this is something which usually can happen only in training analysis. It's very difficult to get anyone to get to this level of insight in normal 2 to 3 year course when you are coming only once or twice a week. So we see this complete manifestation of separation difficulty in a variety of pathologies as they are classified under DSM.
You also talked about the somatic symptoms which manifest from here. Can you name some examples?
Somatic, okay. Asthma.
Like usually we see
Yeah.
people have just skin issues, then
Right.
long-term chronic blood pressure issues,
Correct.
low blood pressure.
Correct. So take psoriasis, take asthma. So in many cases of this, I'm not saying all, but in many cases of this type, say thyroid, again, many cases of thyroid, many cases of skin issues, many cases of broadly a large component of the autoimmune sicknesses. You see the difficulty of separation in some way manifesting itself. That very early in life, some sort of attachment trauma and inability to mourn it completely has happened. And that has left behind lot of unprocessed emotions, especially of sadness, guilt, anger, and inability to develop a good containing capacity. So what happens there is the sadness is too much to process, often accompanied by anger and guilt, but sadness at the center is too much to process. So it is kept repressed, and that ultimately loads the immune system and some organs. And the outcome of that is very high anxiety. Like, let us say you undergo a separation and you cannot mourn the sadness completely, and the sadness is inside of you. Now, the moment the sadness is about to rise or activate in some way, the anxiety rises, because anxiety is a cover of that difficult emotion. And that anxiety is a signal anxiety. It is not a catastrophic anxiety. It's a signal anxiety. And the signal anxiety rises, and that in turn creates symptoms. You can either experience it directly in terms of high heartbeat, high anxiety, or it can somatize in various ways. You feel headache, you feel diarrhea, you feel loss of appetite, you feel loss of energy, loss of muscle tone, occasionally whistling in the ears or balancing problems or the tingling sensations, some tightness, contractions in the muscles, or wetting of the palms. So we see the somatic part of it, essentially of the sadness deeply repressed because it cannot be mourned completely. And along with it are anger and guilt. And guilt should not be underestimated. We usually don't underestimate sadness and anger, but we underestimate guilt. So guilt also is a very strong component of it. And this is where the somatic part comes in. Let me give an example. In my own asthmatic breathing, on the PFM meter, usually I don't score about 250 in summers. And a few days back, I scored something like 350 for the first time.
Oh,
And this has to do with the processing of emotions. So we are nearing the Zoom time. So I'll continue with this in the second part of our discussion.